Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the massive IPO of JSW Cement. We're going to follow the money, we're going to weigh the promises against the risks, and really get to the bottom of the story behind this huge deal. So let me start with a question for you. How do giant companies actually get the money? We're talking thousands of crores to fund their biggest, most ambitious ideas. Well, they often turn to the public, and that's exactly the journey we're looking at today. All right, before we get into the nitty-gritty of JSW Cement, we've got to make sure we're all speaking the same language. Let's do a quick run-through of the ABCs of going public. It's super important for understanding the whole picture. Okay, first up, the IPO, or initial public offering. The easiest way to think about this is like a company's big debut on the stock market. It's that moment a private firm decides to open its doors and sell off pieces of itself, or shares, to investors like you and me for the very first time. It is a huge deal for them, and a powerful way to raise a ton of cash. Next, you'll hear us talk about the RHP, the Red Herring Prospectus. Think of this as the official user manual for the IPO. It is a massive, detailed document where the company is legally required to lay out everything: their business model, their finances, the opportunities, and, this is key, all the things that could go wrong. And who's the referee in all this? That would be SEBI, the Securities and Exchange Board of India. Their entire job is to make sure it's a fair game for everyone. They protect investors by demanding total transparency, and they're the ones you go through that RHP with a fine-tooth comb. Okay, so with those basics covered, let's zoom in on the main character of our story today, JSW Cement. Now, JSW Cement isn't some startup appearing out of nowhere. It's part of the massive JSW Group, a name you probably know from steel and energy. But in the world of cement, they've carved out a very specific identity for themselves, and it's all built around one word: sustainable, or green, cement. And look, this green strategy isn't just a marketing slogan. You can see it right here in their sales. Almost 2/3 of what they sell is something called blended cement. This stuff uses industrial byproducts, like slag from steel plants. So that sustainability claim, it's baked right into their core business. And here's the payoff for that strategy, and it's a pretty incredible number. According to their own prospectus, JSW Cement's CO2 emission intensity is a whopping 62% lower than the average of its main competitors. Now, that's not just an environmental fun fact. It's a central part of their pitch to investors. So they've got this great green story. But what does that have to do with an IPO? Well, it's all about funding what comes next. So let's get down to it. Why do they need all this money? The headline number is just staggering: 3,600 crore rupees. But here's something you absolutely have to know. Not all of that cash is actually going to the company. This IPO is split into two very different pots of money. See this? The smaller piece, about 1,600 crores, is called a fresh issue. That's brand new money that will flow directly into JSW Cement's bank account to fund their plans. But the bigger piece, 2,000 crores, is an offer for sale. That money goes to the pockets of existing shareholders who are cashing out a part of their investment. So, what's the plan for that 1,600 crores of fresh cash? Well, the RHP gives us a roadmap. The lion's share is going to something called the Nagaur project in Rajasthan. That's their next huge bet on growth. After that, some will be used to pay down debt, and the rest is for general day-to-day business. But hang on. An IPO isn't just about the exciting growth story. Every single RHP, by law, has a section that details everything that could possibly go wrong. And, this is where the story gets really, really interesting. So risk number one, and this comes straight from the company itself, is what we call execution risk. They state very clearly that their financial future could be seriously hurt if huge projects like that big one in Nagaur don't get finished on time or on budget. Next up is a pretty significant red flag, and it comes from the referee, SEBI. The company discloses that SEBI has issued a show cause notice to key promoters, including the chairman, Sajjan Jindal himself, over some alleged violations. Now, this case is still open, and it definitely casts a regulatory shadow over the whole thing. And then there's the debt. And you don't have to listen to me on this one. These are the company's own words, right here. We have substantial indebtedness, which requires significant cash flows to service and limits our ability to operate freely. And when they say substantial, they really, really mean it. So what's the number behind that warning?
total borrowings of over 6,100 crore rupees. That is a heavy, heavy weight on the balance sheet for any investor to think about.
So we have the green growth story on one side and some pretty serious red flags on the other. But none of this is happening in a bubble. How does JSW Cement actually stack up against the Goliaths of the industry? Let's size up the competition.
Yeah, this table really tells a story. Let's just zero in on a couple of things here. First, look at capacity. JSW is at about 20 mmTPA. Now, look at a giant like Ultratech, over 150. That gives you a sense of the scale we're talking about. And that size difference shows up in profitability too. JSW's margin is quite a bit lower than both of these big guys. It is a tough market to be one of the smaller players in.
So after digging through all the documents, the promises, the risks, what's the real story here? What is the one fundamental question that this IPO is asking every single person thinking about investing?
It really boils down to a classic investment trade-off. It's like a scale. On one side, you have this fantastic promise of ambitious, green-focused growth. But on the other side, you've got the heavy weight of all that debt, you've got fierce competition, and that regulatory cloud we talked about.
And that leads us to the final question, which we'll leave with you. Remember, this explainer isn't financial advice. Our job is just to lay out the facts from the source material. So the real question for you to think about is this. Is JSW Cement building on a solid foundation for explosive growth, or is it facing a climb that's just a little too steep? That's the big question at the heart of this IPO.